This week's episode of Podular Modcast is brought to you by the Novation Summit. I love this synthesizer so much. I'm going to tell you about a little trip that I'm going on here in a moment, and you best believe that this thing's coming with me. So thank you to Novation. Please check them out online. Link in the show description. All right, let's get into the show. Hello and welcome back to Podular Modcast. My name is Tim Held. This week we have Jeremiah Chiu on the show. I saw Jeremiah play a few weeks back with John and Sam from Sons of, who are some recent guests. Jeremiah's set absolutely blew me away, so we're going to talk about that and a whole bunch of other stuff. Excellent conversation coming your way. But first, some business. I've been mentioning for a while that I'm going to be doing I'm going to be passing along some things that I'm no longer using from my studio to some lucky Patreon supporters. It's basically going to be a first come, first serve. At some point in the next month or so, I am going to just put a post up online with everything that's available and little packages basically, and you're going to be able to claim them. So if you want to be able to be in on that, head over to patreon.com/Podular Modcast. There is a link in the show description. Also, we have bonus episodes now. So at the end of every episode, after we sign off, I ask the guest a few more questions. They range from 10 to 25 minutes long, depending on how much time we have and what kind of answers the questions provoke. And I mentioned last week, I've been trying for 2 years now to get to 200 Patreon subscribers, and 2023 is going to be the year. I'm putting that on my vision board. Have you heard of these things, these vision boards? Apparently, they're very effective. So if you would like to put it on your vision board for me or just sign up, once again, patreon.com/Podular Modcast, link in the show description. I would also like to say thank you to After Later Audio for their continued support of the show. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the new-ish Mutable Instruments Classics line that they have released, but I've been using the Razor quite a bit. The Razor is a 1-to-1 blades by Mutable Instruments, and you can see that After Later's got their nice color scheme going on here. I really like it, and the Razor is an excellent module. All sorts of really, really cool mutable, although a lot of the retired stuff is now available in 1-to-1 versions from the Mutable Instruments Classic line over at afterlateraudio.com. Link in the show description for that. And if you're wondering, where should I buy my After Later Audio products? Well, you could go to their website, or you could go to patchworks.com, patchwerks.com. They have all the After Later stuff. They've got Forum-S, they've got Recovery, Schlappy, Mystic Circuits, they've got the new Buchla stuff, everything. But also, they have a whole lot of studio gear. So if you are looking to build your own home studio, like you see here behind me, then Patchworks has you covered. So please visit them online at patchwerks.com. That might be all the business for this week, because I don't have a lot of time to edit this, because this weekend's my birthday. So if you're listening to this the week that it's released, Thursday's my birthday, February 9th, and on February 9th, halfway through the day, my wife and I and some of our good friends are heading out to Crescent Lake, which is up on the peninsula of Washington State, and we got a big Airbnb, and there's a sauna that's on the lake, and there's a dock there, so I'm going to do a polar plunge, sauna, polar plunge, I'm really looking forward to that. And of course, I'm going to bring all my stuff, and I'm going to record some cool performances out there. Hopefully I'll find some nice places to shoot. If you're wondering, how could I help Tim celebrate his 39th birthday? It's the last one in the 30s. You could head to Bandcamp, timheld.bandcamp.com, and buy some of my albums, or you could head over to patreon.com/Podular Modcast. I had to get one more in there. Okay, I think that's the business. Thank you so much for listening to Podular Modcast. Thanks for coming back. If you're listening now on a podcast platform, remember that we are now doing video episodes on YouTube. And if you head over to the YouTube, I would appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. That will help grow the channel, get it into more people's eyes and ears, which would be a good thing for me. Yeah, let's check out this video that I did. So I'm primarily using the Nebulae V2 from Qubit. I am also using the Razor from After Later Audio, the dual-shaped envelope VCA from 4MS, and I'm also using the Nautilus and Aurora from Qubit. And I tried to channel my inner Daedalus on this one. It's a really... I usually don't make patches like this, and it kind of happened by accident, and I think it's really cool. And yeah, I hope you enjoy this video. So let's check it out, and then we will get into our chat with Jeremiah. Jeremiah Chiu is on the show.
Hey,
welcome. It's
thanks
so
for
nice
having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I can't shake the thought this morning that it's weird that we're doing this via, Zencaster, which is Zoom for podcasts for the listener. When you were just here, like you were in my
Right.
house like 2 weeks ago. I wish you guys had more time in between, going back to Portland so we could have done one in person. That would have been awesome. But yeah, but thank you for making time for me today. Um,
Yeah, totally okay. It was great. You have a lovely home.
Thank you.
So I
Thank you.
appreciate the hospitality.
Yeah. Yeah. You building a syllabus. Is that right?
Yeah, I do. I teach graphic design also over at Otis College here in LA,
Hmm.
and school was basically starting on the last day of tour. So it's one of those things that I just do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And how was the tour? I mean, I think the show I was at the opening show, right? For the tour.
yeah, exactly.
Great.
So it was the best tour. It was so easy. I mean, I think that over the past decade and a half or so that I've been touring or playing shows, etc., it's just been this incremental um, evolution to kind of make it the process go as smoothly as possible. And so I feel like this really felt quite dialed.
Yeah.
Both bands in a single four-door sedan.
Right.
Uh, the load was so easy. We could easily get all of the gear in and out in one trip, so nobody has to float by the car and wait. And
Hmm.
there's no drums at soundtrack. At soundcheck, I love drums, but I don't love hearing drums sound checked.
Especially when you're trying to dial in a patch. Yeah. Um,
No, it was great.
yeah. And I mean, it probably didn't hurt that you were touring with two seasoned touring musicians, who have been
Yeah,
doing
it
it a
was
long
great.
time. And what a great couple of guys to tour with. Now, were you buddies with them from the Chicago scene before this, or how did you hook up with Sam and John?
Yeah, so yeah, it probably makes sense to give a little context now
Right.
that
I
we're
was
just
just gonna
diving
say,
in.
Sam and John, who are just on the show, John McIntyre and Sam Prekop from Tortoise, the Sea and Cake, and together they are sons of. Um, yeah.
Exactly. So we just finished a short West Coast tour, about a week long, 5-ish shows, and I was just opening up for them solo, and we were sort of doing this really beautiful in the round setup during these shows. So we were sitting on the floor out in the crowd, and it was a really great experience overall.
Yeah.
I met those guys, I guess, more intimately when I was playing in a band called LA Takedown here in LA, and we had done a tour with the Sea and Cake, which both of them are in.
Hmm.
And on that tour, I think we just, Sam and I connected very deeply just on our love of gear.
Hmm.
It's a deep sickness. It's something that
Sam is a
we
real gearhead for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we
Love it.
both are. All of
Hmm.
us are, right?
Yeah.
That's why
Right.
we're here. So it was just a really good experience in the sense that we really got along, and also, beyond gear, um, we got along on musical adventures in terms of just like what are you listening to, what are you into, and it felt like we were just having this really nice conversation, and great coffee, great food, all of those
Hmm.
things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we just kind of kept on since that tour. And of course, I grew up in Chicago and had played in a lot of bands in Chicago as well. Maybe in, like some of the scenes that were sort of post Tortoise, kind of Tortoise and Scene Cake, et cetera, being sort of the central, bands in that city. But tons of overlap in terms of friends,
Definitely.
musicians, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. Um, Also, I could edit this part out if I'm misremembering, but did I see that you played or did some recording with John Herndon from Tortoise?
Um, I haven't done any with him
I thought, what was it?
specifically.
Okay, it must have been.
Well,
I
John
don't
and
know what it
I,
was.
yeah, I was in during the we've talked about it a lot. He's recently got into the Digitact and Digitone, and had some. He was looking for some Electron conversations, which I'm
Hmm.
always up for having with anybody. But he during the kind of like the height of the pandemic, I was booking a lot of virtual shows via Twitch, and so I was hosting a lot of people that were playing in all different cities, and John being here in LA was also one of those shows that Dan Bitney and his wife Selena, they curated a really wonderful program that was basically them in Chicago, M. Takara and his partner in Sao Paulo, I believe, John here in LA, and then Jamie Branch out in Alaska. And it was just this really beautiful concert that sort of could only happen,
Mm-hmm.
via a Twitch stream during the pandemic. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually have a really funny connection with John Herndon, because he's an artist and a tattoo artist, and I
mhm.
like tattoos, and I was always thinking to myself, like, I think for my 40th birthday, which is actually a year from Thursday, um, I was like, I would really like to get tattooed by John Herndon. So I just reached out to him. I said, "Hey, where are you located? I'm thinking about getting tattooed by you someday in the future." Uh, and then I like tagged the message like, "If you ever decide to get into modular, let me know." And he responded and he said, "That's so weird. Um, I'm actually talking to one of my bandmates right now about buying a case for modular,"
Oh
and
no.
it was John McIntyre.
Right.
So I said, "Oh man, I cannot," because I've been a huge Tortoise fan for
Right.
way before I got into modular. And I was like, well, I've got a bunch of like prototype stuff. Like I have a lot of modules that I don't use because I work for a modular company and I get sent stuff a lot. And so I just built him a little care package and sent it. And
Well, that's
I
great.
wish I could show it to you. I'll put it on the screen in the episode. But as a thank you, he like gave me this giant like original painting. Um,
Yeah,
and yeah,
amazing.
we've just been kind of like chatting here and there since, and it's been really cool and surreal as hell.
For sure,
But
for
yeah,
sure. I mean, they're all great guys, so.
yeah. But we're not here to talk about my stuff. Well, yeah, like, so how many shows were on the tour?
So there was basically, we just did the West Coast, so there were 5 shows.
Okay,
Seattle down basically to LA.
okay, okay. Do you guys play in Arcada or is it Arcade or
Yeah.
Arcadia?
Um, I don't
I don't.
know.
I
It's
never
Arcada,
remember. Okay,
Arcada or
okay,
Arcada. It wasn't Arcadia, not in Oregon. It was in California.
okay. Cool. Um, Yeah, I mean, like you said, you did like the in the round thing. It was
Yeah,
so cool. Like I love Barboza in Seattle where I saw you. Um, I've actually
yeah, it's a
played
great
on
place.
that stage a number of times. It was so cool to I was sitting on the stage watching your
Hmm.
guys' sets, which was, I don't know, it was just a cool experience. And modulars, I think sometimes, I don't know what the word is. It can be a little bit of a hard thing for an audience or for the performer in a live situation. Like, in fact, even at that show, I heard somebody say rather snarkily, like, "Oh, what am I?" Some their friend said, "Can we go to the front or something?" And they said, "Oh, what am I going to do? Just watch people turn knobs?" So I think the
That's
way,
exactly what I want to see.
yeah, right, yeah, no, I mean, I want to like look at like before you guys who came out, like when your stuff was set up, I was definitely just like peeping your systems. Um, but the way you guys had set up that made it more engaging. And then I also bring this up because I think your set in particular, I mean, John, having John having like some percussion stuff, it definitely like adds to a live feel. But the way you were using acoustic instruments, and I have some specific questions about that in a
Hmm.
second. But I want to say that I think you're one of the most enjoyable modular performers that I've seen and heard. Like you're doing stuff, you're interacting with real, you're not just sitting there turning knobs. And your set had this excellent flow of being like one continuous thing that, if you took just little snapshots, it would sound like pretty what's the word, like not repetitive in a bad way, but when like you get in like a
Right.
groove and it's just like a nice
Hmm.
repetitive groove. But it wasn't that. You were like have such a way of manipulating it slowly to add enough change to keep it intriguing. So I just wanted to, you know,
Yeah, thank you.
tip my hat to that.
Thanks.
And then on the
It's
nerdy side, oh, go ahead.
yeah. Well, I was going to say that is something that I intentionally focus on for a long time. You know, I mean, as you can see, I'm like somebody that grew up playing synthesizers in the full scale, but over
Hmm.
time, it's like these things are less practical to bring out. Um, but in terms of performance and composition and music, it's something that I'm also interested in. I use the modular format not for, I guess, a few reasons. One of them being that I find it just an interesting way to work with sound.
Hmm.
You know, sometimes it can be quite linear, and other times it's quite abstract. And then, of course, the size and the format makes it quite easy to bring something out. I intentionally avoid using like a computer on stage just because I personally, you know, I'm also a graphic designer. I'm also teaching, and so I'm on the computer quite a lot, and I really like the sort of tactile instrument itself, where it's finite in some ways in its bounds, and it allows me to then explore something truly as an instrument. So, you know, I think a lot about the idea of the performance itself, but also the sort of narrative and the flow of things, but also thinking about what can I do to make these performances interesting as well. And so there is a lot of improvisation that happens during those sets where I will follow the lead of something that I capture or do or play. I've been to, you know, tons of shows over my lifetime, and it's the same thing. It's like I sometimes hear amazing performances done on a laptop, and I'm like, oh, it would be so great to just bring this, computer.
Hmm.
But I love the performative aspect, the analog. I love that
Yeah.
it's volatile and that something could go wrong, and you can kind of hear that, but there's some level of control that you're exerting to reel those things in, and something might come in that's a little bit off.
Hmm.
You know, a lot of my listening is you know, a lot. I listen to a lot of jazz and experimental and etc. And I like the feeling of improvising in this context because I also don't see a lot of people doing that exact thing. And so I'm sort of looking for the um, humanness in
Hmm. Yeah.
electronic music
Yeah.
or these forms. So that's really the goal. And I appreciate you picking up a little bit on the you know, acoustic elements, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I could have not rambled as long and just said, what you said there at the end. Like, you are really good at injecting the human element into this, you know, this type of music that sometimes doesn't sound like it's made by humans, you know?
Right, right. I mean, the
um,
other thing, especially in the realm of modular that happens, and I'm sure we've all heard, is like the number one comment that I'll get usually from people after they see my set is they're like, it's so amazing that you were able to play songs, you know, or like there's like
yeah,
song
totally.
structure,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it's not just sort of one patch. And I think people
Mm-hmm.
are so used to it being like one patch for 30 minutes with a lot of reverb and, um, you know, intentionally, like the way that the system is set up is a little bit more straightforward so that I can kind of traverse through many different things on it at any given moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and speaking of the system, I have I guess it's a question, but I'm going to try to I want to try to guess first.
Sure, please.
Cuz I did peep your system.
Hmm.
The live recording, were you basically turning down like the mixer that your morphogene was going into, turning off going into the live input, sampling into morphogene, going to the sound on sound, and then turning it up in the mixer, and then like
Correct.
deleting what you did to get to the next thing?
Exactly.
That's
Yeah. So
nice.
you know, this this set is basically it. You know, was like a morphogene workout,
Hmm. Yeah.
but I basically have I have my mixer, which is, you know, like a, you know, too many channel Frap Tools mixer, you know,
Hmm.
and I
Yeah.
basically just have the aux sends that one of them goes to morphogene, and the other one goes through sort of a chain of other effects.
Hmm.
And so that at any moment I can send any channel and pick those things up.
Oh,
So I
that's
do like
awesome.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, to use the aux
That's
sends basically. So
Yeah. Well, and speaking of like going back to what you said about, trying to build out song structure and building, sometimes people build just the one patch to try to play for 30 minutes. That's kind of, I don't know why I've always tried to make just my 7U case work for a live
right,
situation, probably just because I don't want to bring a bunch of stuff. But
right.
that's really hard to do at my
It's
current
very
level.
hard.
So yeah, I've got the Morphogene, the Nebulae, and the STS, and I'm trying to,
Right.
and I'm introducing guitar into my process now. So yeah, just by using sends, just like you said, and the live sampling thing. My friend David, who was with me, he was like, "How was he not getting feedback when he was recording that
Yeah.
live stuff?" And I was like, "Because he's using Morphogene, and this is what he's doing." And I was like, "I wonder if."
Yeah.
I was like, "I'm positive that's right." Um, yeah,
Yeah, and it's
just
just proximity and testing. There have been
hmm
sets and even during that where you do pick the PA back up into the system.
hmm
And when that stuff comes in, you just kind of listen to it. And I think that that's
hmm
also really a huge part of the performance is just listening. And then just finding that moment where you're like, it didn't pick up exactly what I thought, and I have no idea what's coming out of this right now or what it did pick up. Or sometimes I'll leave an extra aux on by
hmm
accident, and then it's just picked up
hmm
all sorts of stuff. And you just have to kind of ride that wave
Yeah,
and
yeah,
see how you can reel it in and build off of it. I think
yeah.
that I've worked with like a huge number of samplers and granular modules over the years, and I really love Morphogene because I feel like it's quite musical.
hmm
And so there's some sort of understanding that I have with the way that it functions that I just am really used to at this point. That's different from other granular or sampling devices. I do use a lot of other samplers, but that particular one, I'm like, I kind of know what's going to happen more or less, and it will surprise me, and then I can play with that.
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of where I'm at with Morphogene. I was using R bar for a while, and I've had
Right,
Lupa, and
right,
I just got Nebulae, and I actually let my friend David, who was at the show with me, borrow my Morphogene because I was like, I just got the Nebulae. I really want to wrap my head around this because I don't want to just try to make it a Morphogene, and I don't
Mhm.
want to just like get frustrated and just put the Morphogene back in the case if I'm not getting what I want out of this. But yeah, I would say like I do a lot of these like remote performances where I just go out in the woods or somewhere with my battery powered
Right,
synth, and the Morphogene has been probably for 90% of those like the primary way that I can make something interesting on the fly in by
right.
Crater Lake or something, that was a long tangent. I usually don't get
It's
this
okay.
far into
This is
into
what
the
people are here for, right?
yeah, right, yeah. I usually don't get this far in without. I usually start with background and stuff, but yeah, I was really curious about the tour and everything. But I would like to. I know a little bit about your background. Just I was listening to another interview that you had done. But yeah, when I guess like what's your journey to modular, and how does
Sure.
modular fall in your lap? Because that's always a pretty interesting story.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up playing synthesizers. You know, interestingly, the like group of friends that I had in high school, I think there was, well, in particular, Mike Browers, this guy and his older brother, I think was introducing us to drum machines and
Hmm.
synthesizers, and they started to just get passed around, our family of friends, and we would just hold on to them, and then started to have be in bands that were traversing, from emo and punk to electronic music or sort of everything in between, and it just kind of grew from there. I ended up playing in a bunch of bands, having my own projects, etc. And then I was playing in a band called Icy Demons for a while in Chicago, which is probably how I met some of the other people like Jeff Parker or Josh Abrams or people in like the Chicago jazz world, because the um, the main songwriter Griffin Rodriguez was an amazing bass player and songwriter, and he and Chris Powell, who was in Man Man in Philadelphia, there was like this sort of connection, and the hub of our musical endeavors were at this studio and shared work live loft on Chicago's South Side called the Shape Shop. And
Oh, cool.
Shape Shop just was home to a lot of different artists and musicians over the years. So, went from playing in Icy Demons to playing in this band called Chandeliers as well. That it was like a hardware synth, uh, group. And so there was always kind of this through line or thread of like, it's cool to see people play these synths.
Mm-hmm.
And not just program them entirely. And as I sort of continued forward, that scene or that space was so um, amazing because it just introduced me and to so much music and so many approaches to music making. Because there were people like Keith Jackson, who's like this amazing jazz musician in Chicago that was like practicing, and then in one room, and then Brett Sova, who does Axis Sova, who's kind of like more of like a psych rock or garage rock, or he's gonna be mad if I miss this genre, but he's making amazing music on with his guitar that kind of traverses all this territory. And then you have the electronic musicians and the all sorts of different things all in one space. And when you're kind of hanging out in the living room or the kitchen, it's just like records are flying through,
Mm-hmm.
and you just hear tons of stuff over time. And so I think that a lot of what happened, and there was something that was just brewing anyways, is that you started to be influenced by really like things from all over the place. And so I'm listening to as much Moondog as I am YMO, as I am anything Chopin, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
And it's kind of like this mix of stuff that you start to try to bring into your palette, and that's what develops it. So when I'm doing when I'm making stuff, that's always the challenge. Is it's like it doesn't sit in ambient music or electronic music or modular music, but it's just like there's all these touch points of sound that I'm interested in bringing into it. And then getting into modular, basically what happened is at the time at Shape Shop, there was this video synthesizer artist, Brown Shoes Only, Nick Chianti, who now lives in Portland and works at LZX. And it was just an evolution. He was really into modular stuff, and he was making video modules. And at some point he was like, you want to buy my Make Noise system? This was like V1 original case, Make Noise. Wow. And I was like, yeah. And he gave me like this great deal. And I just remember sitting with that thing, after having worked with all of these kinds of synths over time and learning how to like basically sync them using an 808 or through MIDI via an MPC. And we were like really MPC people for a long time, because I thought it was you could control so much stuff with one device and have samples. And then as you got into more, basically like with all these old Roland things, it's just triggers, gate triggers that advance sequences. And so once I got into modular, it was like, okay, it's now notes and gates and all this stuff together. It took me a while, I think with that first system where I was just sitting in my living room, plugging stuff in and being like, oh, that's clearly an output that I'm putting an input into, like over and over and over again until I was like, what is going on? And you kind of have to dive into those manuals for a while to understand them conceptually, and they're much more complex sometimes than meets the eye. And it just really started to open up for me. So that was kind of the way I got into modular. And then doing more and more shows, trying to avoid bringing out, tons of gear, it got
Yeah.
to this point where my system basically is like several monosynths and effects and chains
Hmm.
in a case. So it really is
Yeah.
kind of like analog monosynths. You know?
Totally. Yeah. 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 And that whole, going back to that thing you mentioned a minute ago about like, I don't want to just make ambient or whatever, I want to just
Right.
make basically the music that I feel like a lot of people, or this is myself. I try to, I get into so many different types of music, and then I start looking for, if I'm listening to a lot of Deerhoof and I'm listening to a lot of, like, something super ambient, I'm like, is there anything that exists that's like a little bit Deerhoof and
Right.
a little bit this, and there's probably something, but if you don't find it, then for me that becomes the inspiration for what kind of stuff I want to make.
For sure.
And I'm not as like driven by like I really want to make a pure modular song or anything like that. And
Right.
yeah, I've just been a lot more excited about the prospect of bringing guitar back into it, because I basically ditched all the musical instruments that I had any sort of proficiency in once I got into modular.
Right.
And now I'm just barely proficient with modular, but I'm like, well, I'm good enough with it where I can start introducing some stuff that I'm actually good at. So maybe I could make some, substantially more listen toable music. Um,
And I think that I've developed a pretty high threshold these days for things that I can listen to and things that I want to experience, because sometimes, especially when you get into the realm of like academic music, or truly experimental stuff, some of that stuff is there are studies, and you're
mhm.
listening kind of through them. Um, and I have a high threshold for that stuff because I'm engaged in thinking also about what the process is of these people that are making, and I do that sometimes as well. If I'm creating something that's like a sound installation or more of a study or a sound work rather than sort of like something that I would say is a musical, output for you to listen on repeat or whatever.
Right.
There are just
Totally.
different ways of thinking about the
Hmm.
sound world that I
Yeah,
think are all overlap. They all influence each other. They're all quite interesting. And I'm less interested these days in defining what that thing needs to be, because I do think that like a work, like an album, can function as in many different ways.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Um, just really quick.
Uh huh.
I think it was Jeff Parker that I was thinking of that I saw
Yeah,
you.
yeah, Jeff.
Is that, did you recently jam or play a show with Jeff or something?
Yeah, Jeff and I have gotten into some stuff. He lives quite close by and has the most amazing band that plays at ETA, this really small cocktail lounge bar
Hmm.
in Highland Park, and it's so intimate, and so beautiful. But Jeff and I have become quite good friends over the past few years, also because we both work with International Anthem. Um,
Hmm.
and it's just this great family and community of musicians. But Jeff is, you know, uh, Jeff and I got together. He was helping me work on some solo music and some, it's great. He's amazing.
That's awesome.
So,
That's awesome. I love that
yeah,
Four Folks album that he released
oh, it's
last year.
amazing. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, speaking of International Anthem and albums,
Hmm.
yeah, it was funny. I bought that album, and then I don't know if I got your is it Oolong Islands?
Hmm. Yeah. Long
Um,
Islands.
Oolong Islands. That's right. I was like, oh wait, these have the same. Oh, it's the same label. That's pretty cool. But yeah, I want to talk about that album. But before we go into that specifically, you talked about, like not necessarily wanting, having to know what a thing is, but just as a thought experiment, you're gonna make an album, right? Like
Hmm.
starting today, you're gonna start tracking an album. Like, what is that process for you? Like, do you try to think of some sort of like narrative or concept, or more of a feeling or a vibe that you're trying to go for, or and when you with specific songs, do you get like melodic ideas in your head that you then try to make, or do you more like try to find something to pull out of your system than to follow? Like,
Right. I think it really varies. I think it's all of those things. The one thing that I've sort of that I know is that making anything takes a lot of work, and
so
you
much
kind of have
work.
to
Yeah.
keep chipping away at it. And sometimes, starting things can be quite easy because you can just riff, turn things on, press record. You'll find these sort of moments that dial in. But finishing them, or editing them, or getting them finalized is quite hard, because that's when
Mm-hmm.
the story develops, or like the meaning kind of solidifies. And so when I'm starting, I always sort of have like, I have infinite project ideas that I'll sort of
Mm-hmm.
riff on, and sometimes they kind of find each other and meet each other. Um, and this is where like the visual world also comes in. My practice as a visual artist or a graphic designer, all of those kinds of things kind of can meet, and sometimes these projects traverse. From being like, oh, I started off with trying to do a song, but now I have like a sound installation or whatever that ends up being. But sometimes I think it's like when you're noodling in the studio,
Mm-hmm.
um, it is that micro moment of detail where you're like, I found a pocket where the feeling evokes something special.
Mm-hmm.
And when you sort of feel that, it's quite nice. Other times, you're like, I have this song and I'm gonna make song, and I sit down and press record and I need to make song, and then you listen back and you're like, not good, you know.
That's
Um,
oh my God, you're totally explaining my process currently. Yeah.
but my partner Marta has heard me infinite times go back to the hard drive, pull something out that I recorded, and hear me just be like, "Hey, this is it's pretty good,"
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that
And I
distance,
have,
that temporal
yeah.
distance is really important, I think, for a lot of stuff.
It's
Like,
true.
um,
Um, yeah, so it is and it isn't sometimes linear, and things will start. But like, as for example, right now I am really working on a couple different records simultaneously, which have very concrete ideas or expressions or themes behind them that I start to try to explore. For my solo record right now, there's just tons of music, but I haven't really developed the through line of how they all connect. But I understand right now that, and this is in part why I was doing some of these tours, is that you kind of try some of that material out. And I am really exploring that idea of like humanness, or, the human quality or connection in electronic music, or
mhm,
using electronic tools. So, what that narrative is, I think right now, human is just far too broad and too general.
mhm,
And how do I kind of dial into different aspects of the human condition, that then I can say, like, this song is exploring this, or this piece is touching on these moments. And that's kind of where things kind of get dialed in, because I can start to hear that narrative. So, you know, if we want to jump into the record the that I did with Marta
sure, yeah.
for an international anthem, recordings from the Olan Islands, like that one was a very different approach to making a record than any of these are. So each time I'm working on a different project, it kind of has its own process that I try
Yeah,
to
I mean,
develop.
that one seemed like very involved, like multiple places in the world over a period of time, and it had, actually, can you just kind of give us the rundown on that for the people who
Yeah,
don't know?
sure. So yeah,
It's
it
fascinating.
was a project. The record is called Recordings from the Åland Islands. It's done by myself and Marta Sophia Honer on International Anthem, and it's basically a record that we recorded that started basically from a trip that we took to the Åland Islands, which are in a series of islands that make up an archipelago that sit between Sweden and Norway. And we found ourselves there because we were actually out there with a group of friends to help another friend and her mother start like a small hotel, basically that they could also double as artist workshops or a residency space, etc.
Hmm.
So gave us an opportunity to go there, explore this landscape and this place. And out of that, we didn't intend to make a record, but we found ourselves with a lot of moments of just like time and space. And we had our instruments, of course. So we were recording little snippets of stuff, just kind of improvised, impromptu. Um, One of our dear friends that was with us there, Sean Pecknold, is also just like a constant voice memoist and is just capturing all of these different moments throughout our journey. And so we didn't intend to make this record. And when we came back, I started to hear all these little snippets of a recording and thought maybe this could become something. And then sharing that, with Scotty McNeese, who runs, co-runs International Anthem. At some point, he was listening to some of these things. I think we were just hanging out. He's like, "What are these recordings, and can I hear more of them?" And he helped us basically. He basically said, "Can you craft these things, fully?"
Uh-huh.
And it set us on a path to kind of develop that record in full, because it was probably, I would say, 75% there. It had all these different moments, but it wasn't fully coherent as a record yet. But what ended up happening is that we kind of gave ourselves a framework or a structure to work with from those recordings, which is to say, like, if we're going to use this, let's only use what we happened to capture while we were there. Let's not go to a studio. Let's not overdub a bunch of music and rewrite or re-record anything, but actually the quality of some of these recordings, which, a lot of that record does come from field recordings that are done on an iPhone, um,
Hmm.
have a air about them. You can sort of feel their presence in a different way. And so can we use just what we have? And it wasn't really a ton of material,
Hmm.
we sort of had finite amount of stuff. And that's also why when you listen to that record, it's like, there's not much bass because we weren't playing bass, like we weren't composing in that way. They were just snippets of moments.
That's fun. Like, now that you mention it, in hindsight, I'm like, oh yeah, there isn't much bass, but you definitely don't miss it. Um, and the field recording side of it is, you know, one of my one of the things that really drew me in, because I have, field recording equipment and weird, underwater mics, hydrophones, geophones, and
Right.
stuff, and um, I know field recording is something that is, there's a lot of overlap with the modular community and stuff, but I feel like I'm really hunting for a way to use it as its own voice, as an instrument,
Right.
but not just have it be run of the mill field recording. And I feel like, your album is a really good one to listen to, for, to take inspiration from, because I think
Sure.
you did that just masterfully. Like,
Thanks.
and the having the, is it viola or violin?
Yeah. The viola.
Yeah. I mean, just having that alongside the just everything is just like the humanness, because,
Right.
there's bits of conversation and laughing in these parts, and, these candid moments that it all just fits into this thing. And then when you get the vinyl and you get like that, the booklet, and you get to go through the
Right.
whole thing, and understand the whole story, it really becomes this thing that's so much more than just an album, and I'm
Right.
just like so attracted to stuff like that. I think, like, yeah. So I'm going to stop rambling. And if there's anything
No,
else
no.
about this that you want to share,
I
I
mean,
would
I
love
think
to
I
hear
think
that.
that's exactly what it is. What we touched on earlier, and thinking about like making an album versus making a work that sort of can stand in a different context, but also it just takes the
Hmm.
format of like an album. I do, we did approach that record in a way that's like, it's a story. That's really what
Hmm.
it is. This is a story that we're trying to tell, and that we captured. And so the feeling of it, listening to it front to back, is quite integral to the experience of it. So it can live with you in that space, but it feels like, could we create something that actually felt like it transported you to a place that, that you've never been to, or maybe you have been to, but that it actually has that quality of it being not overly perfect. In fact,
Hmm.
it's far from. And I love to leave those moments in the performance and
Absolutely.
everything, where it's like, maybe the pitch went out a little, or maybe there was these extra sounds, or there was, a part of that where, um, part of it was from a live performance in the church, and you can hear a boy coughing in the recording. But I was like, I'm not going to edit that out. Like, that's what happened, and
That's what.
it
Yep.
puts you in the space. So
Totally.
I
Yeah.
really like leaving that stuff in all of the music, because those are the things that actually, I think, uh, you might feel more than you might hear. I think it's important to keep that.
I 100% agree. That's why no matter where I go when I'm doing like these like remote performances out wherever, I always have because I use my field recorder, is that's how I record my synth, and then I got my shotgun mic and my stereo mics, and I'm always recording those too because you never know what's going to happen, and I have people
Yeah.
come and ask me funny questions, or like, and sometimes I include that in there, and it does become part of the this idea that I've been kicking around a lot and talked about a few times on the show is this like sonic journal, rather than
Yeah.
having go back and reading like I was sad this day or whatever. You can go
Right.
back and be like,
Right.
I'm looking at this video that I made, and I do a lot of them on my wife and I's anniversary road trips. We every year we take an
Mhm.
anniversary week-long road trip somewhere. So my wife really enjoys. She's not she's not super stoked when I'm like, oh, just one more take, when she's just kind of sitting
Right.
there watching me record them. But she does enjoy them as like these these kind of like rather than showing people slideshows at our house of our
Right.
Yellowstone vacation, it's like, here, check these videos out, because I cut
Yeah, it's
in
great.
video as well. And yeah, it's like, I don't know, there's something that's, I don't know what that just draws me in, and I don't know why that's something that I just feel like I really want to like capture when I'm out there. But
Yeah.
I
I mean,
love
I
doing it, and I
wish,
love hear people. Yeah,
yeah, I wish I was more sort of diligent about the quality, the fidelity of the recordings, but I just end up using my phone more than anything
really.
else because it's there. It's there. And I think there's also something nice about, not seeing the microphone, and it
Hmm.
changes the capture of their performance in some ways. And so, like, there are certain, of course, there are times when I'm like, oh man, I wish this was a lot of time. Like, I wish this was higher fidelity, but you can do stuff with it. And I think how it sits in a mix and, how it's treated makes a huge difference. But
Hmm.
I like the candid nature of some of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think also it was out of necessity, but first getting when I was first getting into like making my own music with the DAW, I was basically running drum machines through effects pedals and stuff.
Right.
And I had, I didn't have good equipment, like I had really shitty equipment, in fact. So there were guitar parts that I'd actually use my laptop mic as my input. And then I would say, okay, well, rather than try to make these sound like they're not a laptop mic, how can I lean into that? And I got really into like, using things for effects that weren't like plugins for effects that weren't effects, like, um, putting weird like de-essers on things that were really tinny, and like
Right.
trying to, and it was just like a really fun way to explore and cut my teeth in the whole like experimental side of music.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
exploring.
Hmm. So how long were you out there on the island working on the hotel?
So we had done two trips. The first trip was about two. Both of them were about 2 weeks, and the first one was in 2017, and then again in 2019. But the second time we went back, we um, had a familiarity with the place. We had a little bit more of an intention. We were able to get a grant to play a concert there in the church, so it was much more formal.
Hmm. So is the album made up of recordings from both trips?
Yeah, it basically composed. It's like by the time we went back for the second one, we kind of knew we were like, let's make a record.
Hmm.
We had some ideas. So we did a concert and recorded that whole thing, and some of that made its way into the recording. And the hotel at that point was more or less up and running. The first trip we were doing a lot of like demo and painting. Like we were just knocking down kitchen appliances and walls and stuff like that, and and it was super fun. But when we went back there, it was just like, here's an opportunity to explore a little bit more. Um, I mean, that place is amazing because in the summer, I mean, first off, there's barely anybody there. It's like a super small island of like a few hundred people. I think that we went to the high school and talked to somebody, or the school rather, and they were like, there are 14 students that make up the class of K through 12. Like
Whoa.
it was like
Wow.
super small.
My graduating class was 1.
Exactly. So it ends up being this, a little bit of this place where it's like what you're presented with is time and space, and the sun in the summer, the sun doesn't set. So like you have this really strange experience with a landscape that kind of invites you to slow down, and just kind of relax and think and be. So
It's amazing what that will do for creativity and inspiration. My wife and I are avid campers,
mhm.
and as often as I can try to bring my music equipment out to air. This actually next weekend for my birthday, we're going away for 3 nights up to Crescent Lake, which is on the peninsula,
Oh, nice.
and yeah, I'm just going to bring everything out there and try to shoot as much video and play as much stuff. And there's just something about getting out in the woods and away from your everyday experience that, for me
Right.
anyways, just really like, it's just bellows on my creative fire.
For sure. You're just like me,
uh,
man. I can't take a vacation without bringing everything and booking a show.
oh, totally. Yeah. When I went to New York, I was like, as my wife, since we're going to be out there, do you think I could try to book a show? And yeah, I ended up playing a show in the East Village, and yeah, it was awesome. So also we're coming up on an hour here soon, and I
Sure,
want to
sure.
make sure I don't overlook the fact that you do have a new album coming out soon, right?
Yeah, we have a piece that is part of the long form editions
Mm-hmm.
series, which is, it's I don't know that it would be a full album, but it is a substantial amount of music that could
Yeah.
easily be, I've heard shorter albums.
Yeah. Right.
um, so yeah, it's 19 minutes of music,
Okay.
which, in thinking about it in the context of a single piece, it's like it was hard. It was a lot of
Yeah.
music to kind of to develop something that felt like it flowed through. Long form editions, I'm sure you're familiar with. It's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. It's a
Can you
really
describe it
wonderful.
for the listener if they
Yeah,
don't know? Like Sam did one,
yeah. It's
right?
exactly Samsung 2, I think.
Oh, okay. Right. Right.
So it is a series that is digital. They're on Bandcamp, and they put out basically they have 4 artists do long form pieces each volume of that series, and so I think they're probably, I'm guessing, on their 30th volume at this
Mm-hmm.
point. Um, and I think they come out quarterly, more or less.
Okay.
Every few months, you have like a new batch of 4 pieces that are long form, and that's really the only parameter, is that they're long form, and it's amazing to kind of listen through because um, there are so many different artists there, all doing amazing work, and so there's this really beautiful connection between all of those works, but their approaches are very different.
Mm-hmm.
um, to thinking about long form. So you'll have some, as an example, you'll have someone like Bitch and Baja's, creating a 30-minute piece that is more drone oriented, or uh, you know tonal, very long tones, and it's sort of incredibly lush and beautiful and slow moving. But then you'll have another piece that's extremely active. Sam's
Mm-hmm.
pieces are a little bit more active, and I kind of love that they all live in this space together, and just carry the through line of like, it's a long piece.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Um, yeah. It kind of reminds me of, have you heard of the Tone Science series?
I don't
Um,
think I have.
Ian Body on the Din label. I think there are 4 or 5 now, but they're
Great.
basically just compilation albums, with each track is a different artist, but um, yeah, the idea is just like be experimental and explorative, and yeah, there's really great stuff. I, you know, I think our Benny's been on Light Bath, Div Kid. I was
Great.
on one of them, which was really awesome. I was
Nice.
on with Light Bath and I think Andrew Huang.
Oh,
But
great.
yeah, if you're into, yeah, it's kind of similar except for its individual tracks and albums. But I think
Right.
you should check that out as well.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
the piece that we did is worth listening to if you've heard our previous record because it's actually quite different
yeah.
than anything you might have heard from us. Marta and I do this together as well.
Okay.
Um,
Cool.
so yeah, it's something that was composed in studio and just has a totally different expression than the recordings from the Olan Islands.
Hmm.
So
Well, yeah, and that's what I think. I wasn't sure what to expect from your live set when I saw you a few weeks back because
right,
I knew that the album was a little more collaborative and had the field aspect and everything. And
right,
yeah, it was cool to hear something different, but that still had kind of like a that human thing. Whatever
right.
your voice, basically. Like I really like when I can hear an artist's voice, in multiple recordings that might be kind
Yeah,
of far away from each other.
I appreciate that. I mean, it's something that I don't recognize entirely, but I sort of have my tendencies,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and hope they
Totally.
go through. But yeah, there were parts in that set that were like very beat heavy or
Mm-hmm.
rhythmic,
Mm-hmm.
polyrhythmic, and I was like, there were some shows where I was like, I'm going in right
Yeah.
now, and
Yeah.
it's just kind of rhythmic chaos, and it
Mm-hmm.
felt quite fun to do. But yeah, the I do perform a lot in LA solo as well, with a number of collaborative artists. So
Mm-hmm.
I am trying to um, think about this practice, as a synthesist or modular person where I can collaborate I love the idea of it, of like being able to play at the jazz club with a couple of jazz musicians
Totally.
improvising
Yeah.
together, but I have my modular system and that's kind of how we do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I do collaborate with a lot of different people and it's super fun. Dustin Wong, I played a lot with. Booker Stardrum is an amazing, sonic magician. And so there's like all of these people that I think are working solo and are able to come into a collaborative context. And we're just all kind of trying to find opportunities to collaborate and work with each other. So the scene of musicians doing this right now feels very active, very fertile, very fun.
Totally. And I also like something that's exciting to me about this is, like modular is definitely gaining in popularity. And I think it's starting to break through out of just like the hobbyist, super niche nerd zone.
Yes.
And getting, the fact that, the, the guys in Tortoise are messing with it and you're playing with,
Right.
with Jeff. And I'm excited to see where that goes. So when you are jamming with like some jazz musicians in that setting,
Uh-huh.
do you use like envelope followers or anything to try to like get some sort of sync or reaction from them?
Yeah.
Or okay,
Yeah, I have done that. So most recently, we did like 2 nights at the same club called ETA that Jeff and his group play at, and it was me with half of Jeff's band, myself, Greg Allman, who's a guitarist, um, Anna Butters, who plays bass, Josh Johnson, who plays horn, and then Booker Stardrum on drums. And it was like actually an amazing set of stuff that we recorded. 2 nights, 4 sets. And it was the first time I went into this with like a completely empty, no patch, no
oh
nothing.
wow,
Everything was just kind of empty. And I was like,
uh
let's
huh,
just see what happens.
hmm,
And, they're so well versed that like we spoke no words before we sat down to play. And it wasn't even like, should we play in this key? It wasn't
right,
even that.
right,
It was just like, somebody start and we will
yeah,
follow and we'll
uh
just
huh.
kind of do this.
Those are the
But I
best. I
did
love that.
yeah, it was super fun. So I did have a couple envelope followers, but also just like ways to sample live and then remanipulate. So that's where some of these other granular things come in,
Hmm.
where you can just riff off of something. But also at this point, I'm like pretty used to like how a sequencer works and where hits will fall and what that rhythmic thing is just by looking at the thing without hearing it.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of these moments of like, I'm going to program a beat on the fly based on what everyone else is playing, and then bring that in and see what happens. You know,
Uh-huh.
for the
Uh-huh.
most part, it worked.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's awesome.
So
I used to do these things called Monster Planet here in Seattle, where they were like these 4-hour improv jams where you would just, the person who ran it would get, 4 to 5 musicians who don't know each other, no plan. You show up and
right.
you all set up, and then there's a person doing like video, like VJing,
Oh,
basically, just
cool.
like
Yeah, yeah.
mixing up video, and you just jam. And I felt like a lot of the times I would start bringing in a drum beat to try to see if, because, a lot of for 4 hours, you just get a lot of people in their own world making a lot of
Yeah.
noise, but there would
Right,
be
right.
these moments of magic sometimes. And I would try to find those with drum beats sometimes but yeah, I love just getting together and, it's probably more fun for the people involved a lot of the time with stuff like that. But I feel like with
Yeah, you
it's,
have to be aware.
you're right. Yeah. If you know what it is, and I feel like also with like live musicians, that would be a lot more
Yeah, I
engaging.
mean, I
But
think there was a part of it where it's like we have a mutual respect and trust with each other,
mhm.
um, and doing it in front of an audience, there is a sort of an understanding of like, well, we're not here to just like we have to actually be very precise with what we decide to do at any given moment and kind of like wholeheartedly go in, you know. So
Right.
there is
Right.
a
Yeah.
dialogue that's happening that you're watching, and I thought that was
Mhm.
really special.
Yeah. Awesome.
So
Well, do you have like 10, 15 more minutes? Because I do a Patreon bonus section, but if you're running low on time, then we can.
sure, yeah, we can do that.
Okay. But
That's totally fine.
before we get into the bonus section, is there anything that you want to shout from the modular mountaintops before we
From
sign
the
off?
modular mountaintops. I don't know. I mean, I guess right now I'm just working on getting a bunch of music edited and done, which is really exciting. Many different projects that take forever to brew, but then we'll eventually make it back out there. We're doing some touring in Europe in July, but otherwise, just like just making stuff, doing stuff, and it's been a real pleasure to be here and chatting with you about this, and getting into some of the real details.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe too
it's
much, but good.
no, no, this is perfect. Um, right on. Well, then let's move on to the Patreon bonus thing.
Great.
I'm just gonna wing it here.
Sure.
Um, what's the best movie that you've seen lately? Or I guess let's not make it that specific. Is there
Okay.
has there been a piece of like a song, an album, a film, a book, a painting, any sort of art that has really moved you in the last few months?
Yeah. It's moved me for years. um,
Okay, that's our show. Thank you so much for coming back to Podular Modcast. Don't forget, I'm going to be passing on a bunch of stuff from my studio, patch cables, modules, and some cassette tapes, stickers, and whatever other goodies that I can scrounge up here in the next month or so. So if you want to be on the receiving end of the notification for when that stuff is going to be up for grabs, head over to patreon.com/Podular Modcast. Let's get to 200 subscribers this year. That would be awesome. Also, thank you to Afterlater Audio for their continued support. Don't forget about the Immutable Instruments Classics line. Patchworks.com, Patchwer, and Patchworks, our lovely synth shop here up in the... And also thank you to Patchworks for their continued support of Podular Modcast. You can check them out at patchworks.com, patchwerks.com. Also links to all of Jeremiah's stuff in the show description. Yeah, I think that's about all I've got for you this week. The secret word for this week is going to be 2 words. It's poverty mentality. And a poverty mentality is gonna bring you nothing but grief. Until next week.